is over. Guys, I am very excited, and you should be too, because the best part of the year for college basketball is here. The regular season is done, so are conference tournaments, the bracket has been revealed, and soon enough, we get March Madness. I'm Lila Bromberg. Welcome to Beyond the Bracket, a special edition series of a SportsBeat KC podcast that's here to get you ready for the NCAA Tournament, presented by the First Federal Bank of Kansas City. I'm joined by two insiders into two teams that are on the top two seed lines of a bracket reveal. I'm so excited to have on Jesse Newell, who covers the number one seeded Kansas Jayhawks for us here at the Kansas City Star, and John Clay, a columnist for the Lexington Herald-Leader, who covers Kentucky, which is a two seed. Thank you guys so much for hopping on.
Thanks for having us.
So the bracket was revealed. We're recording this on Monday. You might be listening on Tuesday or later in the week. The bracket was revealed on Sunday night. As our one seeds, you've got Gonzaga in the West, Arizona in the South, Kansas in the Midwest, and Baylor in the East. We're going to get into all the different regions and break everything down, talk about some games that we're excited for, what we think of how everything was seeding, talk about some teams that have a chance to make a run, some high seeds, what lower seeds we think could have some potential to cause some madness here. And lastly, we'll end it like we always do with our final four picks. Jesse, I'll start with you. What was your biggest takeaway from the bracket reveal?
I think that, there's been years where there's been some major gripes and teams that felt like they should have got in, but I don't think I had too many major issues with it. I think some teams being seated where they were a little bit of a surprise to me. And you know this from Lila, from talking to me on the previous podcast, a team like Houston to me, that as a 5 seed is really, really underseeded. Based on what they've accomplished, what they did early in the season, late in the season, margin of victory, strength of record, whatever metric you want to use, for them to be that low, I think probably just speaks to their conference and not getting much respect there. But this is a team that was in the Final Four a year ago, and I think could obviously make some noise there. A little bit surprised a team like Oklahoma got left out, and I know there were other ones on the bubble that were surprised that a team like Dayton got in over them, but I think all in all, nothing too crazy. And I'm sorry that Dayton did get in. A lot of people were saying Dayton was going to get in, but all in all, I think it's, I think the bracket's out now. People are ready to move forward and ready to talk about the picks and some of the sleepers and everything else that goes with the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, Oklahoma had beaten Baylor in the Big 12 tournament as a big win there on their schedule, had a win over Texas Tech, but, had some bad losing streaks there in the Big 12, ended up finishing 30th in KenPom. That was one of the surprises left out there. Oklahoma also finished 39th in the net. They were 4-12 in quad 1, 6-2 in quad 2. Another team that was left out, and John, you got to watch them live at the SEC tournament, was Texas A&M, which made a run to the SEC tournament finals, ended up being one of the last teams left out. Do you think Texas A&M should have made the field? What do you think about them being left out of the bracket?
Well, I think they're certainly as good and playing as well as a lot of these teams who made it into the bracket at the end of the year. I think if you look at their whole body of work, though, I think probably that 8 game losing streak that A&M had in the middle of the SEC season probably was something the committee couldn't get past, especially when, so we're told they are no longer, and for several years now, they no longer just put a lot of emphasis on those final 10 games where Texas A&M played really well, especially in the tournament, where they knocked off Auburn and Arkansas before losing to Tennessee in the final. But they look at the whole body of work, and I think that's probably what kept Texas A&M out. But as far as how they're playing right now, I think they're certainly playing as well as a lot of those teams who got in on the back end of the at-large participants in the tournament.
Right, and so you cover Kentucky, which is on the 2 seed line, and I guess we can start with that region first, even though that was the last reveal, but we can maybe start there. I thought Kentucky ended up in my opinion, what's one of the tougher regions of the bracket. In my reaction piece said that I think it's the toughest there. You've got Baylor as the 1 seed, Kentucky as the 2 seed, Purdue as the 3 seed, UCLA as the 4 seed. Right there in that region, you've got St. Mary's at the 5, Texas as a 6. You've got some exciting mid-major teams in there as well. I don't love that Murray State and San Francisco have to play a first-round matchup because I like both those teams and thought they could both be an upset to kind of go far in the tournament. What is your reaction, John, to the East section of this bracket?
Yeah, not a big surprise that Kentucky's a number 2 seed. I know Joe Lunardi apparently said before Kentucky played Tennessee in this SEC tournament semifinal that if Kentucky won that game, he thought they would be a 1 seed. But then, of course, Kentucky lost to Tennessee. I think you could make a really strong case that Tennessee deserved a 2 over Kentucky, considering Tennessee beat them head-to-head 2 out of 3. Tennessee had a really good record against quad 1, quad 2, playing really good basketball. Here at the end of the year, I think they're 15-2 since Kentucky beat them at Rupp Arena. We talk about in the tournament about it being matchups, and I think you've got some interesting matchups for Kentucky if they go through the bracket. As you mentioned, Murray State and San Francisco. Murray State, 30-2, an in-state school. Obviously, will be pumped if they play Kentucky. But like you mentioned, San Francisco is really good as well. I thought both those teams should have gotten better seeds. I think San Francisco's 21 in KenPom, Murray State's 27 in KenPom, and you've got a 7 against a 10. And if Kentucky can get by that round, then they play Purdue. And as you know, on our previous podcast, Lala, I picked Purdue at that time as a Final Four team. I backed off that a little bit, but I think they would be a tough matchup for Kentucky because bigs have given Oscar Tshiebwe problems. Obviously, Purdue has a couple of bigs, and Edie and Williams, and then Jaden Ivey, he's a matchup nightmare for anybody. So I think some people are saying, well, I think Vitale said he thought Kentucky had a good draw. I see where you can kind of make that case, but on a matchup game-by-game basis, if I'm Kentucky, I'm a little worried about those matchups.
So you brought up Tennessee, and that was a team I should have brought up before, as I think a team that kind of got the worst bit of it in terms of where teams were seated. I really thought that Tennessee, after winning the SEC tournament, was going to get on the 2 seed line, especially, I didn't think over Kentucky, but I was thinking especially over Duke, because Duke had lost to Virginia Tech in the ACC finals. They also lost to North Carolina in Coach K's last game at Cameron Indoor. And Bart Torvik posted what I thought was really interesting, looking at the team sheet ranks of Tennessee and Duke. You look at Tennessee and Duke in the net. Tennessee is 7, Duke is 12. In KPI, Tennessee is 4, Duke is 14. Strength of record. Sorry, I just had that pull up there. Strength of record, you've got Tennessee at 3, Duke at 11, and that's just overall. You look at non-conference, and Tennessee is stronger there as well. You look at BPI, Sagarin, KenPom, just anything across the board. Quadrant 1 wins, quadrant 2 wins. In terms of Duke having a quadrant 3 loss and Tennessee not having any, like you just kind of look across the board, and Tennessee was the better team. Jesse, what did you think of that there, of Tennessee being seeded 3, and how does that kind of compare to what you've seen in the past of how teams are seeded, especially when they're playing on that Sunday?
Well, yeah, no, I think you hit on it. I can make it pretty simple because, I talk so much about this because of how I do my poll, but if you're looking at the best teams, the ones we look at by possession data, the most accurate things we have, as close to Vegas spreads as we get, you look at KenPom, okay? And that's kind of the middle of the road analytics one, basically the most accepted. Duke's 12 and Tennessee is 7. So, hey, if you want to take the best team, you take Tennessee. If you want to go to wins above bubble, which is we're talking about strength of record, hey, how well did you do against your schedule compared to how a bubble team would do against your schedule? You look at that, Tennessee is 4th, Duke is, 11th. So whichever metric you want to use, Tennessee was better over the course of the season, but Duke is Duke. So again, those are the discussions that I'm sure were had in the committee. And sometimes I think this is where the human element might lose some of this potentially, because I don't know what discussions could be had to put Tennessee below Duke, but that's why everybody watches the selection show. And that's why it's so important to talk about this, because the draw is the draw. You know what I mean? And you don't get to pick it. And sometimes percentage points of potentially you making the Final Four of the championship are all determined by some committee where it's a little bit of a black box. So I agree with you on every point that you made. And unfortunately, this is one that they got wrong, and it's going to affect a couple teams. But as we know in March, if you win your games in front of you, you're going to be just fine. And so that's what Tennessee and Duke need to do with the specific roads that they got.
Right. And so just to have the update there, Duke was kind of interesting. Duke asked to be put in the Midwest region to be in Coach K's hometown of Chicago. They didn't get the Midwest or the East. They're going to end up in the West region of the bracket. And then Tennessee, I'm just looking at my bracket right now. They're going to be in the South regional as that 3 seed. You were there at the SEC tournament, John. I mean, do you think it's kind of hurt the SEC to have that championship game on a Sunday? Do you think that might affect moving forward if they decide, hey, maybe we should have the conference tournament moved up a little bit and have it end on a Saturday?
As somebody who's covered the SEC for a long time, we've had that discussion for many years now, and there is no doubt that it is affected, or really that it's had no effect on the committee playing it on Sunday. No matter what happens on Sunday, the committee, they don't seem to care about the SEC championship game. So yeah, I think it does hurt them, but they're not going to change. So they get ESPN has them slotted into that Sunday spot. That's where the money is. So they're not going to change because of it. But I think it definitely hurt Tennessee. I think it definitely hurt Texas A&M. It didn't help either one of those. But do I expect it to change in the future? No, I don't.
So back to that East Regional, Jesse, when you look at that with Baylor and Kentucky, I think when we did some of the podcasts earlier on, those were 2 teams that I thought could make a Final Four. Purdue's in there as well. Those were names that were all mentioned when we've done previous versions of this podcast as teams that could possibly make a Final Four. Who do you like to come out of that region?
Well, I've loved Baylor all year, but I loved Baylor all year before Kentucky was in their bracket. So yeah, no, I actually like the Wildcats. I think that obviously Sheboy's the Player of the Year candidate, has been great for them all year. Ty's another dynamic player. John Calipari's been there before, and out of all these elite coaches, he's the one that potentially, if you look over the course of time, has done better in the tournament than what he's done in the regular season. So that's a tough bracket. That's a tough regional, all those sorts of things. And I love Baylor. I've loved him throughout the course of the season, but I think Kentucky's better than Baylor. And so if you're just asking me to pick right now, I would take the Wildcats to go to the Final Four. That's not just because John's here either.
If you guys are looking at that region, looking at a team that come out that is that is a 4 seed or lower, maybe not necessarily Final Four, but to at least kind of get to the Elite 8 in that region, is there someone you like there? I guess, John, is there anyone you like there that's kind of a 4 seed or lower?
Not really. I mean, I like Virginia Tech to knock off Texas in the first round. I think Virginia Tech, I think they're a team that probably wouldn't even have gotten in the tournament if they not made the run that they had in the ACC. But I do think Mike Young is a really good coach. He was coach at Wofford when Kentucky played him a few years ago in the tournament. I think he's done a really good job. I like them to make a run. Like I said before, I like Purdue, but they're a 3 seed, so that's not really an upset there. I'm kind of the opposite. Jesse's the Big 12 guy who likes Kentucky. I'm the SEC guy who likes Baylor in that situation. Of course, and Jesse can speak to this more than I can. What's the situation with Cryer, with LJ Cryer, with that foot injury? Is he going to be able to play or not? But the thing that worries me about Kentucky, and I think about the old joke about 2 beat writers talking to each other before the game, and the one beat writer says, my team's not going to win, they're not any good. And the other beat writer says, my team's not going to win, they're not any good. I know your team's going to win. After you watch them all year, you see all their flaws, and you think in the tournament the flaws are going to show up. With Kentucky, to me, there's a lot of landmines between there and the final before they get there. But I like Baylor. I just feel like Baylor has that attitude, even though they're a different team than last year. They've set that standard now that the players want to carry on. So I like Baylor, but I'd like them a lot more if we knew what their health situation was too.
I think the good news, John, is that whatever their health situation's been, they've just kind of stayed pretty steady throughout the course of this year. They've got some good players, whether it's Akinjo, who was conference or one of the all Big 12 team members You talk about Kendall Brown, who's super athletic, Matthew Meyer, who's a guy who can shoot and fill it up. And obviously Jeremy Sohan came on late in the year. He dominated Kansas. He's a big man who's very versatile, can drive to the basket, all those sorts of things. So yeah, it's a credit to Scott Drew for doing that. If that ended up in the Elite Eight, that's a great game. But to answer your original question, Lila, I think I'm going to answer your question with your original statement, which was, I think this is top heavy regional. So I don't really like any of those bottom seeded teams because I really like all the top seeds.
And with injuries, John, what is the latest with Kentucky and where they're at health-wise?
They're probably as healthy now as they've been in a while. Ty Washington didn't seem to have any problems in the SEC tournament with that ankle. Severe Wheeler seems to be okay. Now, Jacob Toppin did suffer a broken nose in the Vanderbilt game. He had to wear a mask in the second half. It was funny because after the game, Severe Wheeler was talking about, Jacob was really good. He brought a lot of energy. We couldn't understand what he was saying through that mask, but he was doing a lot of talking. And we asked Toppin about that yesterday. He said he got a better mask for the next game. But overall, I think they're probably as healthy as they've been in a while.
And UCLA is in that region as well, as a team that went to a Final Four last year and was picked, if I recall correctly, number 2 in the preseason poll, or somewhere in that top 5, and was expected to be a really good team, and just has kind of underperformed all year, but they still have all of those pieces pretty much there. Is there any chance that they finally figure it out this time of year, you think, Jesse, or you think that they're just kind of not going to live up to that potential?
Well, they're good. I have the same problem with them as everybody else, which is all the, I'm going to use John's word, landmines in front of them. And honestly, I think that might be why I like Kentucky a little bit more than Baylor here. Is that 4-5 game, UCLA St. Mary's, whoever wins that has to play Baylor. I mean, good luck, Baylor. That's a tough opponent. I know that Kentucky, we have to play Purdue potentially. Purdue has kind of been, to me, up and down, up and down. I mean, when their offense is going, they're really difficult, but there's times they kind of stink it up defensively and don't look like themselves, and they can lose by quite a bit too. So I'm not loving Baylor's path to even get to an Elite Eight. So UCLA could definitely do it. It's a one and done tournament. And we've said it before, this region is as top heavy as any of them. So if one of those teams makes a little bit of a run, that's not going to be a surprise at all.
I could honestly see Wyoming or Indiana, whoever wins that play-in game, beating St. Mary's. Indiana has kind of put that little run together in the Big Ten tournament, and they've surprised me with some results this year. And I think Wyoming's a really fun team to watch and has a really great offense that could be fun as well. Yeah, just a tough region. I think you'll see, I think I'm going to have Kentucky coming out of that region as well, but there's just so much potential for something to happen there, and just so top heavy. I think it's by far the worst, region to be a 1 or 2 seed in. And just because there's so many teams. And if you're a lower seeded team in that region, it's going to be really, really tough. We'll move on to the west side of the bracket as well, where you have Gonzaga as the number 1 seed. Duke is the 2 seed. On the 3 seed line, you have Texas Tech. The 4 is Arkansas, and the 5 is UConn. And then at 6 is Alabama, a team that I think is going to, no matter what, just give some people some trouble with their bracket. If you're listening and have not been paying attention to college basketball as much, and you're just kind of tuning in now, I would not pick Alabama to win many games, or maybe they will. You really don't know. They're such a sporadic team. Who's to say? Also in that region, Michigan State as the 7 seed. And we can kind of get into some of those later seeds in that region as well as we get into talking about this all here. Jesse, who do you like in this West region?
Gonzaga. Yeah. Chalk me up on this one. I talked with you a couple weeks ago, Lila, on this podcast about, I love UConn. I think they're a team that probably some of the underlying numbers say has performed better than what it's shown this season, but I don't love them as a Sweet 16 matchup against Gonzaga. Out of the rest of them, we just talked about Duke being overseeded to me, and Texas Tech is probably underseeded. They had a really good run through the Big 12 tournament. They've been playing well lately, and I think actually they're going to have some benefit from leaving the Big 12 because their style that they play, they've been number 1 defensively in the nation while playing the style that basically every team in the Big 12 has copied. So everybody sees that style and they're still able to execute it better than everybody else. So, if they play a team like, I don't know, Alabama or whoever, they're going to go, what is this? These teams don't play this in the SEC. What is this kind of wacky style, no middle sort of stuff that's going on here? So I'm probably more chalky here than most, but I would definitely take Gonzaga to sail through here. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but I think, to me, how I see it, last year the cheers were more closer to Gonzaga and Baylor and everybody else, and that's why I had them in my final, my bracket. This year, to me, it's Gonzaga on its own tier than everybody else. So I think they'll be just fine, and this one should make the Final Four.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. To me, it feels more wide open than years past. Like Gonzaga does not feel as dominant to me as last year, but still definitely up there. And I think that's a good point. Is they're clearly the strongest 1 seed, and I don't think their path is as easy as we saw it last year. I remember when Gonzaga's bracket came out, their portion of the bracket last year, a lot of the teams in that region had played and beaten. Having Duke in this region as a team that managed to beat them earlier every year is certainly interesting. And as good as that offense is, I think if they were to somehow meet Texas Tech in an Elite Eight here, I think that's a team that could keep them from advancing to a Final Four. Like you mentioned, a really great defense there from Texas Tech that I think is just going to cause some teams trouble in the tournament. Definitely some interesting matchups there. I think, like I mentioned, I could see whoever wins a play-in game between Rutgers and Notre Dame. I would think Rutgers would beat Notre Dame. I don't know that Notre Dame should necessarily gotten into the tournament. They're one of the teams that I was kind of back and forth on. But I could see Rutgers beating Alabama, Michigan State. A potential matchup between Michigan State and Duke could be very interesting, and a matchup between Tom Izzo and Coach K in his final year. What matchup possibility intrigues you the most here, John?
Well, like you mentioned, I think going back to what you were talking about at first about Alabama, they're such a up and down team all year. I saw them in the SEC tournament, had a 15-point lead on Vanderbilt, ended up giving that away at the end and losing the game. That's kind of the way they've been all year. They're feast and famine with their 3-point shooting. So I agree with you. I could see Rutgers or Notre Dame beating Alabama in that first round game. I'm like Jesse. I like Gonzaga in this region a lot. I saw Arkansas play in the SEC tournament. They played really well until they played Texas A&M. They kind of ran into that buzzsaw there. They're a team that's played real well. Eric Musselman showed last year he knows how to coach in the tournament. I think they're kind of a dangerous team sitting there. But I'm like you guys talked about on the podcast before. And Jesse talked about Texas Tech. I like Texas Tech. I agree 100% with Jesse. They're a team that plays a style that when you play them in the tournament and you're not used to seeing that style, how are you going to react to that? I think I'm picking Gonzaga to come out of this region, but I expect Texas Tech to go far as well. So to me, I know I said on your podcast before, Lila, that I had the feeling that Duke somehow would find a way to get into the Final Four, but UNCL kind of talked me out of that. I don't see that happening, especially in this region, the way it's set up and the way Duke has been playing of late. So I'm like Jesse. I look for Gonzaga to come out of this region.
Jesse, if we see a matchup between Duke and Michigan State, who do you think wins that?
Well, honestly, both teams are a little bit overseeded. Michigan State actually is their resume numbers have gone above their quote best numbers over the course of this year. So they've been a team that historic or throughout the weeks in my AP poll, I've had them not quite as high as other people out there, but it would be a good game, honestly. And that would be an emotional game. Those guys respect each other, and Tom Izzo, I'm sure, was not loving it when he saw that side of it. I mean, he's going to want to win the game. There's no question about that, but I'm just not sure he wants to be the guy that knocks Coach K out of his final NCAA tournament. But it would be competitive. It would be a good one. And, one of those deals, probably Michigan State would be 35% to win it. And that would be the primetime game on whichever day that is, Saturday or Sunday. There's definitely the TV cameras are going to follow that one.
And the 8-9 in this region intrigues me as well, between Boise State and Memphis. Looked like there was no way they were going to make the tournament earlier in the season with all the different drama they were having. It's kind of crazy that they're in, but they went on that run towards the end of their season. They're able to beat Houston twice. Boise State won a really good Mountain West conference this year that I think was the best mid-major conference. I mean, because, WCC, you obviously have Gonzaga, but in terms of just kind of having really good competition between different teams, really good games, having kind of top to bottom, not top to bottom, but just kind of having those top 4 teams all really being in competition with each other. I really like the Mountain West. Do either of you have any thoughts on Boise State or Memphis?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting matchup, as you said. In Memphis, like you said, it seemed like after Penny Hardaway went off on the media, they finally got their act together and started playing better. I know he kind of changed some lineup and changed some rotation, and that helped them as well. But they're another team. They're kind of like Alabama. What are you going to get? Are they going to get are you going to get the high level Memphis in the tournament? Or are you going to get the Memphis that's been so up and down all year? So I like Boise State in that matchup as well, because I think they've just been more consistent. You kind of know what you're going to get with Boise State. I'm not so sure with Memphis.
Yeah, that could be a fun one in the first match or the first round, but I'm just so enamored with Gonzaga. It's like I can't turn my gaze elsewhere. Like whatever team wins is going to lose to Gonzaga. So that's about all I have to say about it.
We're going to take a quick word from our sponsors.
Make the big moments possible with First Federal Bank of Kansas City's March Rate Special. Earn 0.55 annual percentage yield when you open a new 11-month certificate of deposit. Already bank with us? Get started by depositing $25,000 in new funds. New to First Federal? Join us with a $1,000 deposit. Learn more at ffbkc.com/moments and meet our team at any banking center to open your account today. Visit ffbkc.com/moments for more. First Federal Bank of Kansas City, because banking is personal. Member FDIC.
So then we'll move on here to the South region of a bracket. The number 2 overall seed, the first seed is Arizona, 31-3. Just such an impressive job by Tommy Lloyd in his first year there. I think they're one of the most fun teams to watch in this tournament. Just high flying, lots of dunks, and just such a fun team to watch play. Tommy Lloyd is known as a guy that really is good at scouting talent, and it's apparent from that roster. So Arizona is going to be the 1 seed in the South region. You've got Villanova as the 2 seed, Tennessee as a 3 seed there, Illinois as the 4 seed. And then you've got Houston, which Jesse mentioned he thought was a little bit underseeded, as the 5 seed there. And, if you guys are listening and following along, we'll have the bracket in the article online so you can follow along, and we'll have a link to the podcast as well, or you can pull it up on your phone to follow along with us here. John, who do you like in the South region? What intrigues you the most about this section of the bracket?
Well, this may have something to do with recency bias, but I really like Tennessee after watching them in the tournament and at the end of the year. To me, that got a couple of things that you really need to have. And one is obviously guard play. They've got 3 really good ball handlers in Kennedy Chandler, Santiago Vescovi, and Zakai Ziegler. Chandler was the most valuable player in the SEC tournament. I know people get on Rick Barnes that his teams underperform in the NCAA tournament, but I think this team's a little different for Tennessee. They're a really good defensive team, and they finally got their act together offensively towards the end of the year. So I really like Tennessee in this region. I think it'd be interesting if it's a Tennessee-Arizona matchup, because Tennessee beat Arizona earlier in the year in Knoxville. It was a game where Tennessee got off to a big start in that game, and Arizona came on at the end and made it a close game. But I think that would be an interesting matchup as well. To me, overall, I think this is a really interesting region with Arizona, Tennessee, Villanova, the way they have played. I mean, I wonder about Villanova offensively, but I think they're a really good defensive team. And then you've got Houston, as Jesse's talked about. I think this is an interesting region.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Tennessee is really interesting, and a team that I hadn't really been sold on all year, but just lately I've, being able to watch them live and then see on this run that they've been able to go on. Their only loss since the start of February was to Arkansas on February 19th on the road. That was a 10-point loss to, like we mentioned, a really good Arkansas team. Right now, they're ranked 3rd overall in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency in KenPom, and they've got a top 40 offense there as well. As you mentioned, really good guard play. And I'm interested to see with kind of having some young guards there, how that all works and if they're able to get the pieces to fit together. So, I mean, we kind of talked about Tennessee a little bit before, but Jesse, do you like Tennessee there? Do you like Arizona? Who do you like in this part of the bracket?
Well,
Or Houston, I guess Houston.
Yeah, first off, this is the Jesse bracket because when you fill out an AP poll, it seems like every week you kind of get a sense for which teams you're higher on than most. And I think the 1 through 6 seeds are all teams that the analytics have loved more than the resume for the course of the season. I mean, you talk about Arizona, I've had higher. Villanova, I've had higher. Illinois on the 4 line. Tennessee has been, they've been loved by advanced numbers up to this point in the season. And then Houston. So I guess 1 through 5, because Colorado State doesn't go in that discussion, but Ohio State is a 7 seed is the same way. So yeah, this is like the Jesse bracket. I mean, I love a lot of these teams. I think it's a shame for them that they got stuck with each other. I'll stick with Houston, man. I'm really shocked that they got a 5 seed. I don't know what really led to that, but I don't think the difference between them and the 1 and 2 seeds and 3 seeds in this bracket are that much. And so it's a tall task. Like, I love Arizona. I mean, I think they're the second best team in the country, but I think when they play Houston in the 216, it's going to be a 3-point Vegas spread, and if it's a 3-point Vegas spread, that means Houston's a pretty good team and there's a chance that they could win it. And, you can't pick all 1 seeds here. So I hate this region for Houston, but I love the Cougars. So, but like I said, I'm high on those top 5 teams to start with anyway. I mean, if it was Illinois, I could see it. Tennessee has been great even before this week. Villanova has had underlying numbers even as they struggled with some losses early in the season. And like picking against Arizona just feels dumb because they've been so good all year and they are the favorite to come out of this bracket. But like I said, you got to mix it up a little bit. So I love the Cougars. I think I can make another Final Four, second consecutive year, and I'll stick with them for my bracket pick here.
So, when people are filling out their brackets at home, doing bracket challenges, a big thing is always trying to pick those first round upsets. And I think one of the team you mentioned, Illinois, they were subject to, kind of being knocked out by a team last year when people thought they could go to Final Four. And I kind of see a potential for something similar happening here. You covered Silvio De Sousa at Kansas. Chattanooga there is the 13 seed where he is now with Illinois. You think there's any chance for an upset there?
Well, always a chance. And, that's kind of the danger you have when you are a 4 seed is that you're facing teams that are not going to be crazy behind you. And Chattanooga's that way. They're from a smaller conference, but some of their numbers, you're looking at it and the way that they rebound the basketball, obviously with Silvio, a pretty good offensive team, balanced because they have a decent defense. They obviously needed some big time help against Furman, a crazy buzzer beating shot at the start of championship week to get there. But yeah, I mean, if you're Illinois and you've had a good season, the last thing you want is to go in, and I haven't seen the Vegas spread, but I'm guessing that they're going to be favored by about 6 points or so in that first round game, probably about 70% to win, and 70% is not 100%. So it's definitely possible for Illinois to lose that particular game. And yeah, out of all these teams, that might be the one that's kind of unfortunate because you look around in their bracket and you're like, oh, no nights off. And that includes that first game against Chattanooga.
That'll be a fun battle down low too, with Kofi Coburn, I think, in that game. Do you see any potential for upsets here in this region, John?
Yeah. I mean, I like, as you mentioned, I think Chattanooga's got a shot against Illinois. They're another team that's kind of been up and down. When they're playing at their best, they're hard to beat, but they can be a little flighty as well. Ohio State really struggled towards the end of the year. I like Loyola in that game just because Loyola is a tournament-tested team. They kind of like Baylor. Not quite to that degree, but they seem like in the past few years, they're in the tournament time after time, and they know how to win tournament games. So if I had to pick one upset in that first round, I would pick Loyola over Ohio State.
Yeah, that was one that kind of stood out to me as well as just a game where what Loyola does when it comes to tournaments. It just seemed like a matchup as soon as you saw it where, they could easily get a win there. Like you mentioned, Ohio State has been on a bit of a decline there. I think if you said several weeks ago that they'd be as low as a 7 seed, you'd kind of think you were a little bit crazy, but just, ended the season, couldn't even get 20 wins and ended 19-11 after, being ranked in the top 15 at a certain point in the year. So that'll definitely be interesting there as well. The 8 and 9 matchups always make for a good game. You'll have Seton Hall, TCU there. I'm going to go with TCU. I think they've been more tested being in the Big 12, and I've been just really impressed with the job that Jamie Dixon has done there with having a lot of transfers coming in and roster turnover and doing a impressive job there. What have you thought of TCU, Jesse, as someone who's seen them in the Big 12?
Well, they're good at what they do. Jamie Dixon's team, they try really hard, and they're really, really good on the offensive glass. And a guy like Eddie Lampkin inside has really emerged for them late to be able to kind of solidify them and that sort of mindset with their game. They've got a lead guard in Mike Miles, who's not super efficient, but he'll shoot the tough shots. He'll make some of them, and he'll actually, put the ball up on the glass so that the rest of his teammates can go get it. They can't make a three. I mean, that's a big problem. At this point in the year, you would love to be able to score 3 points at a time because 80% of the teams, 90% of the teams left can do that. So that would be my concern for them. But yeah, a good team. Jamie Dixon deserves credit, and to, survive the Big 12 this year and be able to get the wins that he did. Obviously that's a really good tip of the cap to him, and able to get to the tournament and make it in this particular year.
And you mentioned that Villanova has been a team that you have been high on, kind of a team in a similar boat with UCLA, where they've kind of underperformed a little bit in terms of, preseason expectations, but still on that 2 seed line and coached by Jay Wright, have the potential to make a run. What is it about Villanova that you like?
Well, I just think early in the season, especially, they had a few losses in close games, and usually that's kind of when everybody sort of starts to dismiss somebody, and obviously didn't win their conference this year. So people can take that for what it's worth as well. But, the numbers are still like them overall. And some of that is being buoyed by, hey, this is Jay Wright, this is Villanova. If you've had success in the past, it means you're probably going to maintain success in the future. And I think the second half of their season proved that out, that, yeah, they kind of came back to the level we expected them to be. So yeah, they're just another one of those teams in the bracket where it's like, I like them, but you can't like 6 teams from the same region. So that makes it very difficult to pick a Final Four. But me, I've had Houston. I've been on the biggest bandwagoner of them. I think I had them 3rd in my AP poll this week. So if I'm not going to pick them here, then I guess I'm not a true bandwagon guy then. Yeah.
So Villanova right now in KenPom, number 8 in the country in adjusted offensive efficiency, 28th in defense. So that's always a good indicator there. They're the best free throw shooting team in the country, shooting it at 82%. That's always important at this time of year. And they've got experienced guards in a guy like Colin Gillespie, which is always very, very important in March. And so if you were to see a matchup between Villanova and Tennessee, that'll be interesting because, like I said before, Tennessee is led by those freshman guards. So I think that could be a really interesting matchup that has unfolded. Just to kind of end on that part of a region, John, seeing a guy like Kennedy Chandler live, how do you think he would fare against Villanova's guards if that matchup were to happen?
Well, they played early in the year, and Villanova beat them pretty soundly. If I remember correctly, I think it was like 71-53 or something like that.
Yeah,
on a
71-53.
Yeah, on a neutral floor. But Tennessee was a different team than Chandler was. Obviously, he was a freshman just starting out. He's gotten much better since then. Really, Tennessee, one of the big things that happened with Tennessee happened midway through the year when Rick Barnes decided to go big, and he started the freshman Huntley along with Plavsic as his center, and started bringing Fulkerson in off the bench. And that kind of turned him around with that combination with those guards. So I think it would be a completely different game, probably for both teams, if Tennessee and Villanova were to match up in the tournament that they played early in the year. But I think both of them, like both of you all mentioned, have strong guard play, which obviously is important this time of year.
And then the last region of the bracket, the Midwest, Kansas as the 1 seed, Auburn as the 2 seed, Wisconsin as the 3 seed, Providence at the 4, and Iowa at the 5. Jesse, you wrote about why this is such, an ideal kind of scenario for Kansas, kind of aligned with what you wrote they should be hoping for of what they'd want to see in their region. Could you kind of explain that a bit and why Kansas kind of got a favorable side of the bracket here?
Yeah, we just talked about how all these other regions, everybody's looking around going, man, where all these good teams come from? Well, they all came from not the Midwest is what happened, and they basically shoveled them all away from the Midwest. But what I'm talking about, so I don't want to sit here and talk about how Auburn's a bad team or Wisconsin's a bad team, all those sorts of things. What I'm talking about is the committee looks a lot at resume. What did you do? How well did you do with your schedule, the quality of wins you have? And a lot of times what that means is, did you win close games? What we know over the course of time is that winning close games is usually luck. Okay. So a team like Wisconsin wins a bunch of close games. It's great for their resume, but doesn't say great things about maybe ahead what they might be. So if you look at Kansas's region here in the Midwest, almost every team in there fits that description, other than Kansas, which is Auburn. Not as impressive analytically as far as the best teams goes as it is from a resume standpoint. And that's something that's happened from early in the season. I mean, I ranked them really low compared to other people early in the season when they were starting to be closer to number one. And it turns out they kind of fell back into that 9 to 10 range with everybody else. Wisconsin is the same way. I mean, they're outside the top 25 in KenPom. So another team that, like, the resume is great, but the team quality is not as good. And what that means is Kansas, every team they're going to face here in this region, KU's going to be a favorite. Now, does that guarantee them winning? No, it doesn't. But that's better than the alternative, like we're talking about with Kentucky or Baylor or whoever, where you're getting to a coin flip game at some point in your region just to get to the Final Four while everybody else is kind of knocking each other out in other regions. So that's what I'm talking about there. And so if you're talking about the very top teams in there, I think, honestly, Kansas, other than Kansas, I'd say Auburn and Iowa are the two best teams left, and might have to face one in the Sweet 16, one in the Elite Eight. But Kansas cannot have any complaints about this bracket. It's as good as they could have hoped for.
And you've written about this too as well, and I think we mentioned this the first time you were on the podcast about, any concerns about Kansas's defense. I mean, certainly seeing them in the Big 12 tournament, it seems like they've made some strides there. How do you see that paying dividends down the line now as we get into March?
Well, yeah, they've increased their defensive efficiency by 15 or 20 spots here just over the last week. And Bill Self had a quote yesterday at the selection show press conference that he had, kind of talking about how for the first time this past weekend, KU was dictating defensively. They weren't just passive and waiting for the other team to come at them. I think part of this is they've been able to play two tiny guards more like they did earlier in the season. And that's going back to Remy Martin's health. Remy Martin could get out there with DeJuan Harris. And when that happens, they have that kind of the super speed quickness lineup that can deny passes, gives them a little bit more life, a little bit more energy. We know this Kansas team is as dangerous as anyone in the country when it comes to transition. So you speed teams up, you get steals, you get transition, all of it kind of goes hand in hand. And that's sort of what Kansas has lifted, or how Kansas has lifted itself here in this past week. Still some things ball screen wise that they screw up too often. And some of the communication there can be wonky. So still some things to clean up, but for them to be a top 25-ish defense is a lot different than them being a top 45-ish defense, which is what they were a week ago. So all those trends are heading in the positive direction for Kansas. Doesn't mean they're invulnerable, but it means you add that to an elite offense, you have a really good team.
And then the second seed in that region, Auburn. John, what are your thoughts on Auburn as someone who's covered the SEC and has seen them throughout the year?
Auburn's really good at Auburn Arena. They're not so good outside of Auburn Arena. It's kind of been the book on them. They were really bad in their loss to A&M shooting the ball in the SEC tournament. It was really weird in the SEC tournament. There were some horrific shooting halves in the SEC tournament. Georgia, starting with Georgia. Georgia's really bad, but then you had Auburn, Arkansas. You had several teams that had really bad halves. They're not playing very well at the end of the year. Even Bruce Pearl, a couple of weeks ago, he was pretty candid in talking about his team, saying, this is not a perfect team. We have some flaws. We've been able to overcome those flaws. But like Jesse said, I think some of those kind of caught up to him at the end of the year. I don't like Auburn the way they're playing coming into the tournament. We'll see. Maybe they can hit. They do have Jabari Smith, one of the best players in the country. Walker Kessler is definitely a factor with his shot blocking. But maybe they can hit the reset button. Maybe Bruce can get them, get them going again now that they're in the tournament. But I don't like the way they're trending coming into the big dance.
It's funny. Bruce didn't talk about those flaws when I was the ballot that kept him off the number one seed or the number one overall ranking. So I'm glad he's admitting it now. Yeah. Maybe it just took a couple weeks.
And I've talked about this before. I think a huge key for them in the tournament is Jabari Smith, but it's also how they're going to play in late game situations with Wendell Green and KD Johnson. I love KD and the spirit he plays with, but there's been a lot of times late in games where he has the ball in his hands and is looking more so for his own shot than to create for others. And when you have guys like Walker Kessler and Jabari Smith that don't necessarily create their own shot, you need that guy to be you need Wendell or KD to be finding those guys in late game situations. And I think that's going to be a huge tell in how far Auburn can go in this tournament, is just kind of how their offense is handled and how well people fit into their roles. I think that's really been an issue for them.
Yeah, I mean, KD was 0 for 14 against Texas A&M in the tournament, where Jabari was 4 for 11. But, watching the game, we were talking there, but, KD, every time he shoots, he could be 0 for 12, but he thinks that 13th shot's going in, and he thinks he deserves the 13th shot. Never mind if Jabari might be open on the wing. And Wendell Greening's he had a really good stretch there where he had 4 deep threes, but he is not, again, in the SEC tournament, but he's not shot the ball well down the stretch either. But I think you're exactly right, Lyle. Get their priorities in line offensively about who should be taking shots, where the ball needs to go to, especially in late game situations, is going to be key if Bruce Pearl can get that straightened out.
Right. And the 3 seed in there. And honestly, I could see, I think USC beats Miami in that 7-10 matchup there. And if they do, I could, USC has not been great this year, but I could maybe see, them finding a way to beat Auburn, or for Auburn to lose in a second round or Elite 8, Sweet 16, one of those matchups. I'm not sure if, especially with Kansas in the region, I just don't really see them getting to a Final Four at this point. I think an Elite 8 is kind of their ceiling right now. Wisconsin, we talked about a little bit. Jesse did their 3 seed, 24-7, led by Johnny Davis, who is the National Player of the Year candidate, who has just been tremendous all year. So another kind of guard leading the way there that has potential to get out of there. And, I think that they're a team that you'll see make a Sweet 16 just because of who they're matched up against. If they were to win that game, they then would face LSU or Iowa State. And LSU, who knows what's really going to happen there, because Will Wade is now out as head coach. A lot of drama surrounding that program, and they'll go into the tournament led by an interim. What do you guys think when you have a team like that that's led by an interim or has gone through drama? Jesse, do you think that is something that they can rally around and kind of surprise some people, or do you think that's just going to ultimately be too much around the program that they're not able to really, do anything here in the tournament?
Yeah, I won't give you the true sports writer answer, which is I'll just wait till it happens and then, tell you exactly what the narrative should be with that. But I'm here to tell you LSU is going to be favored over Wisconsin if that matchup happens. It doesn't matter about the coach. The players are still on the court, and that LSU team has been really good over the course of the season when it comes to beating opponents. Their defense has been elite for most of the year too. Maybe it'll be a pick 'em. Maybe it'll get to that. But I will say this about Auburn. I just said I love KU's path. I might love Auburn's path on the bottom half better than KU's. I think Auburn potentially facing either Wisconsin or LSU is better than KU facing either Iowa or Providence. I think Iowa's a much better team than either one of those other 2 teams I just mentioned, either LSU or Wisconsin. So I actually, guys, get ready. I don't know if you know this. Auburn fans don't like me that much. I think it's going to be Auburn and Kansas in the Elite 8. And I'm going to be there covering the game. And I think about 6,000 of my closest Auburn friends are going to be there seeing me too. So hopefully they'll want selfies. Hopefully they don't bring tomatoes. But I think we're barreling down the tracks of that happening in the Elite 8.
I think that's what we need. I think we need, you to get some Auburn selfies in there.
Only if they want them, and only if they are nice and leave the brass knuckles at home,
And this is maybe not that popular of a take. I don't know, but I think I've liked Providence more than I know Jesse has. I do think that they've been well coached in late game situations, as much as some people might say that that's luck. I do have liked them there in some, but a first round matchup in that region with South Dakota State, a team that leads the country in effective field goal percentage, leads the country in 3-point percentage, just have a lot of guys that can shoot the ball really, really well. their defense is not good. Their defense is 220th in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency, but their offense can light some people up. And if Providence is having a day where they're not shooting it as well, I could maybe see an upset there. John, do you see any potential for an upset there or anywhere else in the Midwest region?
No, I do. I like South Dakota State in that one. I like the Jackrabbits against Providence. I think their luck runs out in that. I'm like Jesse, though. I like Kansas to win this bracket, but I think the better teams are in the Kansas portion of the bracket. I think Kansas and Iowa are the two best teams. It's funny about LSU. LSU's got, you've seen them well, they've got talent. They can play defensively. They've been through this before because Will Wade was suspended when LSU was in the NCAA tournament before, but this is a different set of players. My question is, whose head's going to roll next in the SEC? We had Tom Crean go down. The next day, Quanzo Martin goes down. The next day, Will Wade goes down. Then on Sunday, we get that crazy news that Mike White's leaving Florida for Georgia. And now today, we find out Frank Martin is out at South Carolina. Who's going to be next to go in the SEC, Lila?
Yeah, I mean, definitely going to be crazy how all of that shakes out with the job search. I feel like maybe you could see something from Mississippi State or Ole Miss. I don't know. It's gonna
I know.
I would not be surprised to see something happen with either of those, but definitely going to be interesting with how the coaching cycle plays out over the tournament and throughout this time. Is certainly going to be interesting to watch. Jesse, do you have any thoughts on South Dakota State?
I mean, you mentioned it with their 3-point shooting. I mean, my thoughts are, if you told me that the Ken Pom 49th ranked team was facing the Ken Pom 71st ranked team on a neutral floor, I'd say either team's going to win. It's close to a coin flip. And that's what we're talking about with Providence and South Dakota State. I mean, 2-point favorite, 3-point favorite, something like that. I mean, this is not a crazy upset if it happens. This isn't like, oh my goodness gracious. It's like, yeah, that's basketball. So that's what happens with Providence. And you're entitled to like them in close games, but when they win so many close games like that, that's what they look like in a setting when they're not playing an amazing schedule and they're kind of squeaking by against teams they should beat much better, or at least better teams usually beat much better. So I could absolutely see that upset happening. The only pushback I'd have is it wouldn't be that big of an upset because we know better nowadays. And we know that those two teams, if that's where they rank in Ken Pom, then on a neutral floor, it's not that big of an upset.
And just so everyone knows that's listening, South Dakota State has not lost a game since December 15th. They've won every single one of their games since December 20th when they beat UMKC, Kansas City. So, I mean, that's a team that is on a roll there, and that's certainly going to be a fun matchup to watch. Okay, guys, so we talked about a lot of these teams. Is there anything I didn't hit on that you guys want to touch on? Anything you think that people should know filling out their bracket?
Well, I'll start. First off, I think you have to determine on bracket what you're doing. Like, are you just doing this to say to your friends that you did a great bracket, or are you doing this to win money in your pool? If you are a Kansas fan listening to this and trying to win money in a pool and you're doing with people in this area, do not take Kansas. You will not win money because everybody's taking Kansas. Take Iowa, take Auburn, take somebody else. That way you're going to win money when Kansas loses at whatever point they do. And especially if they lose early, you're definitely going to win money in your bracket. But having said all that, I have Kansas 5th in my AP poll this week, so I'm not like the highest on them. I think they ended up 3rd, but I like them here. I like them better than the other teams, and I think their path is shaped up to be pretty nice. And one upset taking out Iowa or somebody taking out Auburn, I mean, one upset potentially could completely clear their path to make the Final Four. So I love their setup here. I know San Diego State, we didn't mention them, but a lot of length and athleticism. That's given KU some problems. John can talk about that because that KU-Kentucky game at Allen Fieldhouse, that was kind of the key narrative, is that Kentucky really beat Kansas with athleticism. If you look back to last year's NCAA tournament, USC, same sort of thing, could run, could jump, really took Kansas out of what it wanted to do. So San Diego State could be a tough matchup in that regard, but KU still should be a 7, 8, 9-point favorite of that game, and that's one you should take care of. So overall, again, that sounds like a homer pick, but I like Kansas to make it out of there. And if there is that one upset that it knocks out Iowa or Auburn, that thing really opens up for them.
John, not just this region, but any of the regions or bracket strategy, do you have any tips for our listeners listening at home?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with Jesse. I think one upset in any region can kind of have a domino effect and change how things look. To me, overall, and I think maybe Clark Kellogg was the one who said this yesterday on the selection show. I think the transfer portal has changed things so that I don't think any team this year is as good as Gonzaga and Baylor was last year. I think Gonzaga, they're my pick to win it, but I don't think they're as good as they were last year. But I think there are more good teams this year. And I think the transfer portal has had something to do with that. You take a team like Kentucky with Calipari going out and get Severe Wheeler, Kellen Grady, and Oscar Tshiebwe, guys who play important roles, made them so much better than they were before. And it's not just Kentucky, other teams as well. So I think it's a more balanced bracket overall because of that. So, and this goes back to Jesse's point. I think because of that, it just takes one or two upsets in a region that really changes because like I said at the start of the podcast, so much of it is about matchups. And that could really change the matchup. So I'm like Jesse. I think Gonzaga is the best team, but who knows what's going to happen once they get out there and maybe a couple of dominoes fall that we don't expect to fall.
Yeah, I think so too. But I mean, I could see possibly even Arkansas possibly upsetting them early. I think I would still if you're picking your bracket would go with Gonzaga there, but I don't know. I just feel like it's wide open this year. And with that in mind, if you're picking your bracket at home, I would mix in your fair share of upsets there. Obviously not as many as you get further on, but I think we even saw last year with UCLA as a first four team getting into the Final Four. I mean, obviously we kind of knew Baylor Gonzaga was going to win it all year, but then you had Oral Roberts as another team that went far. So, there's a lot of chances for intrigue and upset. Actually, my favorite bracket that one of my friends does is it weighs the chances of if you pick a lower seed and they get an upset, you get more points. Kind of one of those crazy college basketball brackets. But we'll end things as we always do with our Final Four picks. Now those are going to probably change than they have in the past because we have a bracket in front of us. I guess I'll kind of, kick it off here with mine. Out of the West, I'm going to have Gonzaga. Like I said, I could maybe see Arkansas getting an upset there, but ultimately I think Gonzaga is going to get out of it there. Just so much experience, so much talent. I think they'll, have a pretty easy time there. Out of the East, I'm going to go with Kentucky. I've really liked them this year, and I love the experience that they have. Great guard play. Then you've got a dominant guy like Oscar Tshiebwe down low. So that's who I'm going to have there. Then out of the Midwest, I've got to go with Kansas, like Jesse and we have talked about. I think they have a great path. And then I'm going to have Tennessee coming out of the South region. I think you'll get a really great, possibly great game between Arizona and Tennessee. And I see Tennessee being able to pull it out there. So those are going to be my Final Four teams. I'm going to go with Gonzaga, Kentucky, Kansas, and Tennessee. Definitely not what I had kind of earlier in the year, but you get a bracket and things change. Jesse, now that you have a bracket in front of you, who are your Final Four picks?
Yeah, real quickly. I mean, I said them earlier, but I feel most confident about Gonzaga and Kansas because I like their pass better. And with Gonzaga specifically, it's good for talk radio to disagree a little bit. I disagree with you, Lila. I think Gonzaga's better. They're better than everybody else, and I'm happy to take them and not even worry about them in a game like against Arkansas. So happy to take those two. The other two regions, I think it's just unfortunate that some of these other teams I really like Baylor and Arizona, are stuck with difficult opponents. So I said earlier, but I'll take Kentucky and I'll take Houston. That's not a knock on Baylor and Arizona, but I've loved Houston all year, and I think that Kentucky is probably not going to be chosen by as many people out there as should in their bracket just because of the people around them because they're not number one seed. So our Final Fours are very similar, but I feel better about the first two than I do the last two.
What about you, John? Where are you at with your Final Four?
I've got Gonzaga, and then I'm one of those people that Jesse just talked about that should pick Kentucky, but it's not going to pick Kentucky. I'm picking Baylor out of that region. I've got Tennessee, like you all, and I've got Kansas coming out of the other two regions.
Yeah, so if you're listening at home, Gonzaga and Kansas, we all have those in our Final Four. Might be some wise picks there. Guys, this is such an exciting time of year. If you guys aren't, I'm sure you guys are already following along with Jesse and John's work, but if you aren't, be sure to follow along with their work. It'll be linked in the podcast. They're going to be doing great coverage throughout the tournament, covering Kentucky and Kansas, 2 teams we've talked about that definitely have what it takes to go far. So be sure to follow along with their work. Jesse, John, thank you guys so much for joining, and good luck the rest of the way covering the tournament.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, thanks.